Hello and welcome to Real Cheating Story. I awoke underwater. It was warm, salt water, and I was alone. I wasn't sure how many times I had been in this position, but I felt like I was being reincarnated again. The sun was coming up soon, and I knew I needed to get out of this water and start my next life. Perhaps I misspoke. I would continue my life. I was born so long ago that I could not remember the number of years that had passed, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 years. Each time I died or was killed, I found myself later in a warm pond of salt water on a small island somewhere in the world. It was like being reborn, but my body returned to that of an 18-year-old in perfect health. I remembered everything from my previous lives, and while the memories of those lives faded into the background, they could still be summoned to the forefront if I focused on them. Soon, I would begin another life. Someone had taken my last life from me, and from past experience, I knew I would be healed of my wounds completely. My body would be just as it had been through the ages, perfect features, scar-free, and with my hair returned to its original blonde. I would draw the attention of any woman who saw me. My appearance was striking, and I had a certain charm that seemed to inspire admiration. Having lived as long as I had, I was also quite intelligent. Life is a great teacher, and I had certainly learned many lessons. I raised myself out of the water and began to plan my new life. For the last 300 years, civilization had advanced significantly, so I had to create a paper trail to explain my presence. I had started this process to ensure that when I awakened, I would already have birth records, a social security number, a driver's license, and all those little documents that normal people take for granted. I saved my money and made investments over the years, accumulating vast wealth across various accounts. I was a billionaire many times over, but my money was hidden from prying eyes, divided among multiple identities in different accounts and countries. As I settled into my new life, it dawned on me that I hadn't died of natural causes. I had been terminated. This was not unusual. I had faced execution and numerous mishaps over the years. In my last life, I had been betrayed by my wife, Kelly. I needed to bring memories of that life to the forefront, to understand why she had cheated me, as I might need to protect myself from her in this new existence. I wanted to devise a plan, so I focused on how it all began. My memories of Kelly drifted into my conscious mind, starting with a visit to one of the many businesses I owned. I had accumulated numerous enterprises over the years, buying and selling them to myself, which may sound strange, but it was necessary for my survival. Every century or so, I had to let go of my current businesses to prevent anyone from noticing my longevity. I sold my existing businesses to other companies I owned under different identities. Because of my physical regeneration, no one alive at that time would still be around when I reappeared. Old friends and companions had long since passed away by the time I showed up again. If anyone still lived, who would believe the claims of a centenarian? There were times I visited women I had truly loved, usually on their deathbeds, to say goodbye and ease their passing. Most died happy because I appeared to them in my reborn state, looking as I had decades earlier when we first met. I would visit them in their rooms, offering them comfort and welcoming them into the next phase of existence. For them, there was no new life, but the important fact was they passed away believing they were content. They did not fear death at that moment. It was the only gift I could give them for sharing their lives with me over all my lifetimes. I never fathered any children. My wives tried, and I was grateful for their efforts, but alas, there were no offspring. I had long come to believe that whatever granted me eternal life also prevented me from passing that gift on to any children. Medical science advanced significantly over the years, and my sterility was tested. Doctors concluded that I was fertile, yet for some unknown reason, my wives could not conceive. We tried everything, IVF, donor carriers, nothing worked. My sperm seemed unable to fertilize an egg. I knew nothing would succeed, but I attempted it for my wife's mental health. Occasionally, one of my wives would become pregnant, but we both knew the child wasn't mine. Most left me in shame, some lied about it, and a few took their own lives because of their shame. I felt no pity for them because they had betrayed me. They got what they deserved. Back to my story. I was visiting a company I owned before selling it to myself. It was a nice little business that had become bloated over the years. If I sold it, I could streamline operations, as new owners often do. One of the executives had a personal assistant, Kelly, with him during our tour. She was the most beautiful woman I had seen in a long time. Her boss may have been an idiot, but her presence made the meeting almost enjoyable. Every time I glanced at her, I was met with a warm smile. The merger proceeded as planned. Kelly's boss was separated, and she was assigned to me, marking the beginning of our romance. We traveled the world together, exploring beautiful, romantic destinations. I treated her to exquisite dining experiences and stayed in luxurious hotels, always the perfect gentleman. She was on my arm, dressed in designer clothes, and experienced the true power of wealth. Kelly admired her boss. He was handsome, and that was the first thing she noticed about him. He had been anxious about this visit for weeks since it was announced he would tour their facilities. She liked him and viewed him as a father figure. However, she did not appreciate his nervousness. When he finally arrived, he was polite, exuding a strong aura of power, but she watched as he crumbled under the pressure of questions from higher-ups. In an effort to support him, she attempted to flirt with the arrogant individual questioning him, but it didn't work. 6 weeks later, the merger was completed, and her boss was let go. The terms of his separation were fair, but he had lost his wife and daughter to a drunk driver, and his job was all that kept him from losing his sanity. 2 weeks after his termination, he took his own life. Kelly vowed revenge against the new owner, not only for her boss's termination but for failing to acknowledge his death. About a month after the funeral, Kelly was surprised to receive an invitation from HR to report to corporate headquarters in New York City. She was informed that the big man wanted to interview her for a potential executive position. After packing an overnight bag, she was picked up by a limousine and taken to a corporate jet bound for New York City. She was set up in one of the corporate suites at the Plaza Hotel, though she barely slept that night due to nerves. The next morning, she dressed beautifully and was picked up again by another limo, which took her to a private club where she was escorted to a dining room. There, she found the big man, impeccably dressed and waiting for her. As she approached the table, he rose to introduce himself. "Hi, I'm Tom Darby. Thank you for joining me for breakfast. May I call you Kelly?" "Please, call me Tom." That was how her new life began. He invited her to accompany him throughout his business day. He had asked her to be his personal assistant but wanted her to understand the extent of the work involved. By the end of the day, she was captivated by the power and luxury the position afforded her. She accepted the job, which was every woman's dream, plus it kept her close to him as she plotted her revenge. Kelly soon gave up her old apartment and moved into a suite at the hotel. A few days after her move, a fashion consultant and personal shopper arrived at her door. "Hi, my name's Megan. Mr. Darby hired me to update your wardrobe. I just need to learn your sizes and tastes before we begin." Kelly was taken aback as she provided all her personal information and was then told to go take a shower. When she finished, she found Megan waiting in the bedroom with several boxes. "These are some selections for you to try on," Megan explained, handing her garments to evaluate. As Kelly was still processing the transformation, she felt a bit overwhelmed. Suddenly, a crew from the salon arrived at her door. Megan invited them in, and Kelly soon found herself receiving a hairstyling, manicure, and facial. 2 hours later, after the makeover, she stood in front of the mirror, realizing that she looked beautiful. The change was astonishing. As Kelly admired her transformation, Megan began helping her try on different outfits. Megan was enthusiastic, discarding clothes that Kelly thought were perfectly acceptable. It took all day, but finally, Megan was satisfied, and Kelly's walk-in closet was full of both business and evening attire, along with shoes, purses, and accessories. Kelly was a bit overwhelmed by it all. Megan dashed back into the bedroom, rummaging through Kelly's closet for the perfect outfit since Kelly was to accompany Tom to dinner at his club that evening. When Kelly arrived at the club, she was treated like royalty. All doors were open for her, and she was escorted to a private dining room. As she walked through the main restaurant, she felt all eyes on her. The men admired her, while the women looked on with envy. Once inside the private dining room, she found Tom waiting for her, impeccably dressed and smiling. He took her into his arms and kissed her cheek. "You look beautiful tonight. Thank you for joining me for dinner," he said. Kelly felt a rush of excitement. They had a wonderful meal, and when the limo arrived back at her hotel, he walked her to the doorman and kissed her on the cheek. As much as she wanted him to, he did not join her in her room. "Looks like I'll need a cold shower tonight," she thought. As time went on, Kelly found herself traveling with Tom to various beautiful locations. His businesses were diverse and global, and everywhere they went, he was treated like a VIP, which extended to her as well. After about 6 months as his personal assistant, Kelly decided to take their relationship to the next level. She had a plan for her revenge and wanted him closer to her. They were in a hotel on the Italian Riviera, staying in a 2-bedroom suite. After a day of exploring and enjoying a fine dinner, Kelly decided tonight would be the night to implement phase 1 of her plan. After they retired to their respective rooms, Kelly took a long, relaxing bath. When she felt ready, she walked into Tom's bedroom, where he was still awake, working. One look at her, and he carried her into his bed. It was a wonderful night, and from that point on, they were inseparable. Less than a year later, they were married. Tom reflected, "We were great together, we never argued, never fought. We were the perfect couple. So why did she take my life?" As he pondered this while being regenerated, he thought about his business plans. All his companies were being transferred to holding companies to protect them from being exploited by his wives or trusted employees. Unusually, his spouse had died before him, so such plans were rarely needed. Even though he was immortal, he had faced danger before, in plane crashes or car wrecks. In those cases, his wives received income to live on while he assumed a new identity to manage his businesses. But this was the first time his wife was responsible for his death, intensifying his desire for revenge. He got out of the pool and looked around, familiar with the surroundings of the secret island he owned in the South Pacific. As he walked toward the house he had built there, he approached the electronic security system. It beeped, indicating recognition. He appreciated the new gadgets. They were much more secure than hiding a key under the mat. Once inside, he fired up his satellite communication system, booting a PC to check on his companies and the progress of the transfers to new ownership. To his surprise, he found that nothing was happening. "I looked at the date and realized that I had been dead for about 6 months. All the assets should have been transferred by now. What went wrong?" I began to investigate the automatic controls I had developed over the years and eventually came across a common denominator. The systems all believed I was still alive in my previous existence. Someone was logging in daily to my personal account with my username and password. If I didn't log in each day, the processes started automatically. There was only one person who could have captured my password, my wife, Kelly, the same wife who had taken my life. I tried to log in as my old self but discovered that the password had been changed. It seemed someone thought they could keep others out by changing it. I guess they hadn't heard of a backdoor. The first thing I did after logging in was assess the damage done to my empire. After a few days of investigation, I determined that someone was funneling cash out of my businesses into offshore bank accounts. As I examined the programs in operation, I was surprised by how sophisticated they were. Whoever wrote them understood my corporate structure and how to avoid detection. I began to suspect the individuals behind the thefts, but I needed proof before taking action. I relished the thrill of the chase. It had been a couple of 100 years since I had felt this excited. Unfortunately for the thieves, I owned those banks through a series of interlocking corporations, allowing me to stop the bleeding of my wealth without alerting them. A couple of hours of work later, I had arranged for the money to hit the offshore accounts before transferring it to accounts I controlled. After each transfer, my little program erased all traces, making it appear as though nothing had occurred. If the thieves spotted the missing money, they would have a tough time figuring out what went wrong. Once I secured my fortune, I decided to see exactly where I was supposed to be. I knew all my systems still recognized me as alive when they should have known I was dead. I would need to rethink the entire system. Maybe I should have attached some sort of heart monitor to determine if my heart was still beating. This was going to be intriguing. Reading my emails and travel plans revealed that my widow and I were on an extended cruise aboard one of my yachts, accompanied by 3 of my most senior executives. I had found my culprits. They were aware of the current structure of my businesses, and if I stayed dead, they could clean me out. It was now my turn to teach them a lesson. I spent the next 2 days instituting failsafes to prevent anyone from hacking my systems until I could devise a better solution. When I finished, it would appear their plan was working, but in reality, it wasn't. My inability to die had instilled in me a unique attitude toward life, making me desire to sink the yacht. However, I remembered the 10 crew members aboard who were just doing their jobs and had no part in my demise. I had to be more subtle in obtaining my revenge. There was no sense in hurting the innocent. I developed a more complicated plan. The captain of the yacht received a notice from the manufacturer, another company I owned, to dock at the nearest port due to a structural weakness that could put the boat in danger of sinking in heavy seas. They were directed to return for repairs, and since the yacht was near Hawaii, they stopped there. The yacht was placed in dry dock, forcing the conspirators to relocate to some property I owned on a small island. My wife and her accomplices hid themselves there, likely to avoid discovery. I started executing my plans for them. Living as long as I had learned many tricks throughout the ages. I had become a skilled archer and swordsman, and with the advent of gunpowder, I became an expert in firearms. I trained in various forms of martial arts, developing into a formidable adversary. Using these skills, I planned to extract my revenge. The island I owned was private, equipped with electronic surveillance and armed guards to ensure my privacy. However, I had developed the system and knew its weaknesses. Soon, I was inside the compound and hiding in the underbrush. My 3 executives were all between 55 and 62 years old. They had enjoyed a good life and let their bodies slide into disrepair. My first target was one of the heavier individuals. He was ripe for a heart attack, and I intended to assist him in having one. One of the perks of being wealthy was access to the best tools, and I had plenty at my disposal. As I watched my former friend, Lloyd, to learn his habits, I remembered my state-of-the-art holographic projector. It had 6 small yet powerful projectors that created very high-quality images. I set them up around the lounge chair where Lloyd favored relaxing with his evening cigar and cognac. This was going to be entertaining. The next night, I waited for him. He dropped into his chair and lit a cigar. I walked in front of the cameras and started speaking. "Hello, Lloyd. I'm back." My former friend stared in disbelief. The last time he had seen me, I was a 45-year-old man with gray hair and age lines. What stood before him now was a 20-year-old in perfect health, wearing an evil smile. "It can't be. You're dead," he exclaimed. "Kelly told us she did it." "I know, Lloyd. That's why I came back, to get all of you. I want you to join me in death," I said, flashing my most sinister grin. "Just let me touch you. That's all it will take. Just a brief moment of pain, and it's all over. The only problem is that you won't be going to a nice place like I did. You'll be going to a place of eternal suffering." As I moved toward him, I could see the sweat bead on his forehead, his chest straining as his heart raced. "No, stay away. I don't want to die," he pleaded. Pain began to appear on his face as his heart beat faster and faster, and he struggled to breathe. I held my arms out to him. "I didn't want to die either, but you and your friends didn't consider what I wanted. Come to me, Lloyd. The pain won't be that bad." I made the holographic image walk through some lawn furniture. He rolled off his lounger, trying to stand but grabbing his chest, obviously in pain, and collapsed on the lawn. I watched as his chest stopped moving and the light faded from his eyes. Quickly, I gathered my equipment and disappeared into the darkness. About an hour later, some of the staff came looking for Lloyd. They attempted to resuscitate him, but it was too late. He was long dead. I smiled in the shadows, contemplating who my next target would be. The next day, I spotted one of my other executives, Quentin, walking on the beach, preparing to swim in the ocean. He stripped down and covered himself with what looked like sunscreen. I watched him frolic in the water for nearly an hour before he dried off. I never really liked him, so I enjoyed devising a plan for him. My first step was to attract some sharks to the area where he swam, big, hungry sharks. Over the next week, I collected discarded meat and fish parts from the kitchen, as the cooks often prepared elaborate dishes. I tossed the waste into the water near where Quentin swam each morning. By the end of the week, the sharks gathered, waiting for me to feed them. I noticed that the sharks seemed to avoid me, so I swam out with their food. As soon as I left, they went into a feeding frenzy. I had observed Quentin applying sunscreen before swimming each day. One day, I sneaked out of hiding and took his sunscreen. He never noticed it was gone when he left the beach. That night, I mixed some of the sunscreen with fish paste, knowing the strong odor of the sunscreen would mask the smell of the fish to humans. I dropped the tube near the path he always took back to the compound, making it look like he had dropped it the day before. The next morning, I didn't feed the sharks. I wanted them hungry and lurking in the area. Quentin found his sunscreen as he headed to the ocean. I watched as he liberally applied it and began his swim, heading straight out to sea for about a quarter mile before turning back. Just as he almost made the turn, the first shark hit him. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed as he was dragged underwater before he could alert any potential rescuers. I quickly darted back into the brush and retrieved the tainted sunscreen. About an hour later, I saw my last friend, Martin, walk down to the beach, calling out for Quentin. He looked at Quentin's towel and belongings, calling for him again as he gazed out to sea. Just then, a large great white shark surfaced, rolling onto its side. In its mouth was a human arm. Martin stared for a moment before retching in the sand. I retreated into the underbrush, watching the scene unfold. Soon, the beach was crowded with police and responders. I stayed hidden, observing the commotion. The authorities struggled to believe that 2 men had died on this little island within such a short time frame. They questioned the staff, my friend Martin, and my wife, trying to find me. Despite reports from my headquarters that I was on an extended vacation, they couldn't locate me anywhere. As I navigated the darkened pathways of my plan, I realized the police were good at their jobs, and their suspicion was evident. However, they found no proof of foul play. With 2 targets down, my focus shifted to Martin, who left the island and returned to Oahu on the police launch. My wife remained on the island, and while I was tempted to stay, I needed access to my computers to activate the failsafe program that would begin transferring my holdings to my new identity. I planned to cut off their funds and escape routes. After a few days, I used an outrigger canoe to paddle to a larger, more populated island. From there, I took a water taxi to a bigger center and finally booked an inter-island flight to Honolulu. I was closing in on Martin, but I knew he wouldn't be easy to get to. The police were keeping a close watch on him since he was a suspect in my disappearance, especially given the deaths of the other 2. Meanwhile, Kelly felt fortunate. First, Lloyd had died from a heart attack, which had been a weak link in her plan. When a servant informed her of his demise, she nearly smiled. He was the one who managed the transfer code, dividing the coding work so that no single group could understand its full purpose. Kelly had never liked him. He was arrogant and sweaty, and had reluctantly complied when he demanded a personal favor for his cooperation. As she serviced him one evening, her thoughts turned to her husband, Tom, whom she despised. The need for revenge against him pushed her into this unwanted relationship, and soon she hoped to eliminate all her partners in this scheme. With Lloyd's death and Quentin's unfortunate run-in with sharks, 2 obstacles had been removed. She believed in strategic moves rather than luck. If Tom were still alive, she would have placed blame on him, but she knew he was gone. Her memory drifted to the day she had stabbed him repeatedly until he no longer reacted, then watched as his body sank into the depths of the ocean, his lifeless eyes staring as the water closed over him. The police suspected Martin, making him accompany them back to Oahu for further questioning. Kelly waited a week before discreetly slipping away from the island. Tom recalled when Kelly had suggested an extended vacation on their yacht, claiming he worked too much and needed to relax. After weeks of managing his deals, they set off, just the 2 of them with a crew of 10 to handle the yacht. Although the crew stayed out of sight, it was a challenge for the male members, especially since Kelly often chose to be nude on deck, keeping me distracted. Kelly's plan was to isolate Tom while using the crew for privacy. She needed to ensure there were no witnesses when she made her move. Eventually, she targeted a low-life crew member to assist her in eliminating Tom, using her allure to convince him to follow through with the plan. However, when the moment came to act, her lover hesitated, leaving her no choice but to take matters into her own hands. Tom, now operating under a new alias, rented a house by the ocean and another suite in a hotel. He equipped the suite with computer technology to keep an eye on his business empire and occasionally monitor his widow and Martin. In the suite, he established a sophisticated surveillance system to track Martin's movements, waiting patiently for the next development. I had time to delve into the emails, and after a couple of days, a pattern emerged. It seemed my widow, Kelly, began her campaign about 12 months prior, drawing Martin into her web. As my most senior executive, he wielded considerable power over my empire, and I had underestimated both his influence and her cunning. Slowly, Kelly seduced him, and once he was entranced, she began her plot to steal my wealth. Martin was hopelessly in love and complied with her every whim. I had experienced her charms myself, so I understood how easily he fell for her. Kelly was clever and meticulous, devising plans while Martin executed them. Part of me felt a sense of pride in her abilities, but I regretted missing the character flaw that drove her to kill me. I would need to be more discerning in my next choice of partner. As time passed, Martin enlisted Quentin and Lloyd to aid in the scheme. Together, they devised a simple yet effective plan to transfer my money to offshore accounts in small amounts, making it harder to detect the theft. Only Kelly knew that for their plan to succeed, I had to die. One night, after a particularly passionate evening, Kelly lured me to the rail to show me something. As I leaned over to look, she stabbed me in the chest with a steak knife. In disbelief, I stood there as she continued to stab me, then pushed me overboard and tossed the knife in after me. I watched her smile as I sank into the dark water, bewildered by her joy. I had always treated her well, ensuring she received millions each month without question. As I descended, I realized she had tried to kill me. The next morning, she emailed Martin with 2 simple words: "It's done." He arranged for Lloyd and Quentin to join him as he flew to the yacht. The game was afoot, and they began transferring money, hoping to move as much as possible before my absence was noticed. Kelly kept her lover hidden in the main stateroom, claiming I was unwell and resting. One night, after their encounter, she disposed of her lover's body, eliminating another obstacle. Now, she only had to deal with her co-conspirators. She had plans for their demise, but for the moment, she needed them to execute her scheme. Eventually, she intended to sink the boat. As I read through her emails and personal diary, I realized just how cold-hearted she truly was. It would be a challenge to outsmart her, and for the first time in many lifetimes, I felt I had a worthy adversary. I owed her for the betrayal, and this was going to be an intriguing game. Now, let me share a bit about myself. I am immortal, having lived somewhere between 300 and 400 years. Standing 6 feet tall and weighing about 215 pounds, my physique is toned and resembles stone. My hair is a dirty blonde, and my eyes are unique. While they appear green, my pupils are slightly elongated, resembling those of a reptile rather than a typical human. Over the years, I have learned to keep my eyelids partially closed to conceal this trait, and once contact lenses became available, I had special ones made to make my pupils appear round. Because of my eyes, I knew I was different from humanity. I could never have a family or children. This awareness fostered a deep sense of isolation, as I learned to hide my differences early on. In my youth, hunters targeted me for my unusual appearance, reinforcing my need for concealment. Despite my differences, animals seem drawn to me. Dogs wag their tails upon seeing me, and cats are friendly. I can't explain it, but no animal has ever attacked me. Moreover, I possess incredible strength, perhaps not quite like Superman, but formidable nonetheless. Months passed, and Martin grew confident, beginning to appear in public again. He started appearing in public again, first taking walks on the beach, then enjoying lunches at various restaurants along the boulevard, and finally venturing into nightclubs. I was observing him, waiting for a pattern in his movements. As soon as I identified a routine, I planned to make my move. One day, an alarm I had set on the offshore accounts went off. Someone was attempting to withdraw funds. Soon, alarms triggered on all the accounts that Martin and Kelly had created. Panic ensued as Martin began calling the banks, realizing the accounts were empty. He quickly found himself out on the street. I followed him around Honolulu, watching and waiting for him to stop somewhere. I noticed him speaking rapidly on his cell phone. Although I couldn't confirm it, I suspected he was alerting Kelly that their plans had collapsed. I wished I could have heard that conversation. After hanging up, Martin headed toward Diamond Head. I followed him as he spent the next hour climbing to the summit. Once the tourists had left, he climbed over the railing, hesitating as if deciding whether to jump. I intervened, saying, "Hello, Martin. Want me to help?" At the sound of my voice, he turned in shock. "No. You're supposed to be dead," he screamed, backing up toward the edge. He lost his balance and fell, his screams echoing until they faded. With Martin gone, I returned to my island, but Kelly had vanished without a trace. I spent months searching for her, but after nearly 2 years of fruitless pursuit, I began to lose hope. I was enjoying the weather in Cancun when I spotted a woman who caught my attention. She was stunning and smiled directly at me. While I typically remained unaffected by beauty, this woman was different. I hadn't felt such attraction in centuries. She approached and introduced herself as Adria. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life," she said, her smile captivating me. As I struggled to respond, she removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes strikingly similar to mine, with the same elongated pupils. She quickly put her sunglasses back on and said, "I've always known you were here. I've been searching for you for thousands of years. Shall we see if we are destined to be mates?" "I'm Gary," I replied, "and I think that's a great idea." We walked along the beach until we found a coffee shop to rest and get to know each other better. We talked over coffee, sharing stories and feeling a growing connection. Adria told me about her life, how she had reached womanhood around 500 years ago and began sensing my presence. Although she didn't know who I was or how to find me, she felt destined to be with me. After trying to find me over the years, she sensed me in Mexico while she was in Oregon. Without hesitation, she booked a flight to Cancun, feeling closer to me as soon as she arrived. As we talked, I noticed a pleasing aroma emanating from her. When I expressed my curiosity, she smiled and said, "That's the scent of my excitement. Being close to you brings me joy." I grinned, taking her hand as we walked to my rented house. That night, we spent hours together, sharing a deep and profound connection. The next morning, I felt an overwhelming sense of completeness I had never experienced before. Looking into her eyes, she said, "I love you. Our child will be a perfect little girl when the time is right. I'll give you the best baby in the world." I agreed, and she added, "You already have." Confused, I looked at her. We women know when we are with child. Later that afternoon, after showering and eating, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. We took a walk, hand in hand, feeling as if we were the only two people on Earth. Over the next few months, we grew closer than I had ever been with anyone in my long life. It felt as though we were truly meant for each other. As Adria's pregnancy progressed, one evening on the couch, she said, "I just felt her kick. Put your hand here." I hesitated, but she reassured me, mothers know the gender of their children. I placed my hand on Adria's belly and felt our daughter move for the first time. I felt my daughter move. I know I said daughter, but I knew better than to question Adrisa. One night, after an intimate moment, I shared everything about Kelly, our marriage, her deceit, her attempts on my life, her plans to steal my wealth, and her intentions to eliminate her partners. I expressed my hatred for her and my desire for vengeance. Later that month, Adrisa asked, "Do you still want to find Kelly?" I nodded, sensing her nearby. "Let's go hunting," she replied with a big smile. "I still owe her for trying to kill my man. I think she should suffer." I glanced at Adrisa and knew she meant every word. I made a mental note to never get on her bad side. We returned home and settled in my study by a globe. Adrisa began to rotate it with her finger, stopping at Greece. She looked at me and said, "She's living on a small island near Crete." 3 days later, we boarded a plane heading to the Mediterranean. After traveling by train to Crete, we rented a small villa and began exploring the islands on sailboats. On the third day, Adrisa pointed at a small island. "She's there, but I also sense a small presence with her. I think she has had a child." Then she looked at me. "You can't hurt her or her child." I won't allow it. He did nothing to harm you, and besides, we're going to deprive him of a mother." I knew better than to argue, so I nodded in agreement. We spent the rest of the week exploring the island, which was only about 5 square miles and rocky, primarily suitable for raising goats and olives. There were some vacation villas on the seaward side, and Kelly was living in one of the smaller ones facing west. We quietly rented a villa as far east as possible and started our plan to make Adrisa friends with Kelly. Adrisa would not let me near her. Kelly would recognize me and flee again. I wasn't to be seen until it was time for our revenge. It was easy for Adrisa to bond with Kelly, as women naturally connect with pregnant women. After about a week, the two were inseparable. Adrisa told Kelly that I was still working and wouldn't arrive for a couple of weeks, so I had to stay hidden in the villa. I grew bored during the day without Adrisa, but she made sure I forgot that boredom at night, and I was very happy. One night, as we relaxed together, Adrisa said, "I think we're ready to get even. We'll let her suffer for a few weeks and then execute our final plan." After a week, we began phase 2 of our plan for Kelly. One evening at dusk, Kelly found herself on a bluff overlooking the sea. A little voice in her head urged her to strip, and without fully realizing it, she complied. I stepped out of the shadows, saying, "Hi, Kelly. Remember me? You killed me with a knife." I showed her my eyes for the first time. Her eyes widened in shock as she clamped her hands over her mouth to stifle a scream. She backed up, nearly slipping off the cliff, but instead turned and ran, screaming back toward the village. The locals saw her running naked, yelling that she had seen a monster on the cliff. She was soon placed in the hospital and, due to her erratic behavior, deemed not of sound mind and admitted to a mental institution. I visited her a few nights, and by the time I was done, her mental state was completely shattered, or at least that's what the doctors thought. She kept insisting she saw a dead man and that I wasn't human. There was nothing wrong with Kelly's mind. I wanted her to know I was alive and waiting for her. The staff noted her behavior and believed her illness was worsening. Meanwhile, Kelly's son was put up for adoption by authorities who believed she would never regain her sanity. Adrisa and I decided to adopt him, wanting to ensure he wouldn't suffer for his mother's crimes. We raised him as if he were our own son and quietly sailed away from the island. For some reason, Adrisa wanted to stay on my island in the South Pacific, where I had been reborn countless times over the centuries. She wished for our baby to be born there. One night, we spent hours together before I drifted off to sleep. At some point during the night, I felt Adrisa begin to get up. I started to stop her when she said, "I'll be right back." Exhausted, I fell back asleep. The next time I woke up, she was beside me in bed. I reached for her, but she gently grabbed my arm. "Be careful. You'll hurt her." It took a moment for her words to sink in. I sat up and looked at Adrisa. She was feeding our daughter, who was small and delicate, resting on her chest. I carefully kissed Adrisa as she tried to show me our child. The baby was about half the size of a typical human baby. I must have shown some concern, but Adrisa just smiled. "She's the correct size. Our children are born smaller so that the mother feels no pain." "But you're 2 months early," I exclaimed. Adrisa continued to smile, saying, "No, that's the normal time for us. There's one more thing I need to show you." She gently unwrapped the blankets around our daughter, revealing something surprising. Our daughter had a small tail, which was surprisingly cute. Adrisa assured me it would disappear before she turned 1. I touched it, and it wrapped around my finger, sending a strange tingling sensation through my hand. "Don't move yet, she's learning about you," Adrisa whispered. As the years went by, I often wondered how Adrisa possessed such knowledge about our daughter, but she never revealed her secrets. I watched our children grow. Elle blossomed into a beautiful young woman, just like her mother. Kelly's son turned out to be exceptionally gifted. He graduated from college and began climbing the ranks in my businesses, but Elle was truly in charge. After all, she was immortal. Before I knew it, 60 years had passed, and it was time for Idrissa and me to leave this life and start anew. Too many of our contemporaries were passing away, and we would begin to stand out. Elle would understand, as she was also immortal. Our son and his family were normal and would grieve for us, mourning our loss. One night, feeling contemplative, I brought up my plans for our future. Idrissa interrupted me, saying, "I sense another like us on this planet. He is a male, and Elle will find him someday. They will be a pair." I replied, "But don't you know that there can only be one pair like us allowed per planet? We won't be returning here." She stated this firmly, as if there was no choice in the matter. "Will we still be together?" I asked. "Yes," was her only response. "Then let us begin the journey," I replied. The staff found Idrissa and me the next morning when they went to investigate why we hadn't come down for breakfast. They remarked on how peaceful and happy we appeared. Our family and friends mourned us, and we were buried at sea. Somewhere in the universe, two individuals were reborn, this time together. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.